In the bloody underworld of Boston, Richard Castiglione feared nothing except the hollow, traumatized silence of his 5-year-old daughter. Top pediatricians couldn't cure it. Blood money couldn't buy it. It took a terrified waitress, a plastic bottle of chocolate syrup, and a lopsided heart to make the Mafia heir finally speak. If you looked at the police files from the Boston Police Department's organized crime division, Richard Castiglione was described in clinical, terrifying terms: ruthless, calculating, the undisputed head of the Castiglione syndicate. But if you saw him on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in the corner booth of Café Laurent, he looked like a broken man failing at the only job that mattered to him. 2 years prior, the New England underworld had been violently reshuffled during what the press dubbed the Lexington Avenue ambush. A rival faction had opened fire on Richard's armored Lincoln Navigator. Richard survived with a graze to his shoulder. His wife, Sophia, did not. In the back seat, miraculously untouched by the glass and lead, sat their 3-year-old daughter, Lily. She had been covered in her mother's blood, her wide blue eyes locked onto a horrific reality no child should ever witness. From that day forward, Lily Castiglione never spoke another word. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She suffered from severe selective mutism induced by complex PTSD. Richard spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on elite child psychologists, speech therapists, and neurologists. He flew in specialists from Geneva and London. They all offered the same grim prognosis. Her vocal cords are fine, Mr. Castiglione. The blockage is psychological. She is locked inside her own mind, and we cannot force the door open. Richard's world became a dichotomy of extreme violence and stifling, desperate quiet. He ran his empire with an iron fist, brutally eliminating the men responsible for his wife's murder. Yet he was completely powerless when he looked at his daughter. Enter Jessica Jenkins. Jessica was 24, chronically exhausted, and drowning in $70,000 of nursing school debt. She was working double shifts at Café Laurent, an upscale, secluded French bistro in the North End. She didn't read the crime blotters. She only knew that every Tuesday at exactly 2 p.m., the café essentially shut down. The manager, a nervous man named Henri, would clear the back section. 4 massive men in tailored suits would take up positions at the doors, and a tall, severely handsome man with silver at his temples would walk in, holding the hand of a tiny, ghost-like little girl. "Don't look him in the eye, and don't linger," Henri had warned Jessica on her first day. "That is Mr. Castiglione. You serve the coffee, you serve the child's pastry, and you back away." For 3 months, Jessica observed the bleak routine. Richard would order a black espresso. He would buy Lily whatever lavish pastry was in the display case: tarts imported from Paris, gold-leafed macarons, delicate fruit tarts. He would place them in front of her with large, scarred hands, his voice dropping to a low, gentle rumble that seemed entirely at odds with his dangerous aura. "Try this one, Piccola," he would urge softly. "It has strawberries. You used to like strawberries." Lily would just stare at the table, her tiny hands folded in her lap, completely unresponsive. And every week, Jessica watched the most feared man in Boston silently break apart as he drank his espresso, his eyes heavy with an unfixable grief. Jessica, training to be a pediatric nurse, recognized the signs of deep trauma. She saw how the bodyguards, men named Paulie and Silas, who looked like they broke legs for a living, shifted uncomfortably around the child. The entire environment was suffocating. They were treating Lily like a fragile, explosive device, not a little girl. And Jessica, despite her own exhaustion and Henri's strict warnings, felt a deep, reckless ache of empathy for the silent child. It happened in late November. The Boston sky was a bruised, heavy gray, and freezing rain lashed against the windows of Café Laurent. Inside, the atmosphere was even heavier. Richard was visibly on edge. The local news had been buzzing with rumors of the Gallagher family pushing into Castiglione territory at the docks, and his phone had been vibrating incessantly since he sat down. He kept silencing it, his jaw tight, trying to focus on Lily. Lily looked worse than usual. She was pale, her dark curls hanging limply around her face, and she was aggressively refusing to even look at the slice of vanilla bean cake Richard had ordered for her. Jessica was assigned to the table. As she stood behind the counter, preparing Lily's replacement dessert, a simple bowl of chocolate mousse, Henri snapped at her. "Hurry up, Jessica, he's losing his patience. The room feels like a powder keg today." Jessica looked across the room. Richard was rubbing his temples, his broad shoulders slumped. Lily was staring blankly at a water glass. Jessica looked down at the plain white porcelain bowl containing the dark mousse. It looked cold. It looked clinical. It looked like exactly the kind of sterile, depressing thing you serve to someone in a hospital. Without thinking, Jessica reached for the squeeze bottle of premium dark chocolate syrup used for garnishing plates. "What are you doing?" her internal voice screamed. Henry said serve it and back away. Ignoring her own survival instincts, Jessica squeezed the bottle. She didn't do a standard zigzag of culinary drizzle. Instead, right on the wide rim of the white bowl, she carefully drew a heart. It wasn't perfect. The left side was a little thicker than the right, making it look slightly lopsided and cartoonish. She picked up the tray and walked over to the booth. Silas, the bodyguard nearest the table, stepped forward slightly, his hand hovering near his jacket lapel. Richard looked up, his dark eyes piercing and completely devoid of warmth. Jessica swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly, but she forced a warm, genuine smile. She bypassed Richard entirely and knelt down right next to Lily, bringing herself to eye level with the child. This was a massive breach of protocol. Silas moved closer, but Richard raised a single finger, stopping his guard. Jessica set the bowl gently in front of the little girl. "I know it's yucky outside today," Jessica said softly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I thought this might make it a little better. I drew it just for you." She pointed to the lopsided chocolate heart. Richard frowned, his gaze dropping to the plate. He opened his mouth, likely to reprimand Jessica for the unauthorized interaction. But before he could speak, something incredible happened. Lily blinked. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't just stare through the table. Her eyes tracked downward. She looked at the brown, uneven heart on the white porcelain. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a tiny, trembling hand reached out from her lap. She extended her index finger and pressed it right into the center of the chocolate heart. She brought her sticky finger to her lips and tasted it. The silence in the cafe was suddenly deafening. Even the rain outside seemed to quiet down. Jessica held her breath. Richard had frozen completely, his hand hovering inches from his espresso cup, the color draining from his face. Lily looked up. She didn't look at her father. She looked straight into Jessica's hazel eyes. Her lips parted. A tiny, raspy sound emerged, a voice rusty from years of disuse. "Mommy," Lily whispered, the sound barely louder than a breath. "Mommy made those." The porcelain espresso cup slipped from Richard's hand and shattered against the saucer, sending hot black coffee spilling across the white tablecloth. Silas gasped out loud. Henry dropped a tray of silverware in the kitchen. Richard Castiglione, the man who had ordered the demise of a dozen men without blinking, had tears spilling hot and fast down his scarred cheeks. He fell to his knees beside the booth, uncaring of the ruined suit or the spilled coffee, and wrapped his massive arms around his daughter, burying his face in her small shoulder. "Lily," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Dio mio, Lily." Jessica, terrified by the sudden explosion of emotion and the shattered glass, scrambled backward to give them space. She grabbed her empty tray and practically sprinted back to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was convinced she was going to be fired, or worse, that she had somehow deeply offended a dangerous man by triggering his child's grief. 10 minutes later, Henry burst into the kitchen, his face completely pale. "Jessica, he wants you. Out front. Now." Jessica took off her apron, her hands shaking so badly she could barely untie the knot. She walked out into the dining room. The bodyguards had secured the perimeter. Lily was standing now, holding her father's hand, looking exhausted, but tethered to reality in a way she hadn't been an hour ago. Richard stepped forward. The terrifying mob boss was gone. In his place was a father vibrating with a frantic, desperate energy. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask for her resume. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a checkbook and scrawled a number on it that made Jessica dizzy. "I have spent millions on doctors who did absolutely nothing," Richard said, his voice low, intense, and leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You drew a heart, and my daughter spoke. You are coming to work for me." "Mr. Castiglione, Jessica stammered, stepping back. "I'm a nursing student. I have classes. I have clinicals. I can't just—" "I will buy the hospital," Richard interrupted, stepping closer, his imposing height casting a shadow over her. "I will pay off your debt today. $10,000 a week. You live at my estate. You take care of her. You make sure she keeps speaking." He looked down at Lily, who was watching Jessica with wide, expectant eyes. "Please," the most dangerous man in Boston whispered, stripping away every ounce of his pride. "Please save my little girl." Jessica looked at the check. She looked at the terrifying men guarding the doors, and then she looked at Lily, who raised her small hand and gave Jessica a tiny, hesitant wave. Jessica knew she was stepping into a world of blood, secrets, and immense danger. But as a nurse, and as a human being, she knew she couldn't walk away. "Okay," Jessica breathed, sealing her fate. "I'll pack my things." The Castiglione estate was a sprawling, ivy-choked limestone fortress nestled deep within the affluent borders of Brookline. Surrounded by 10-foot wrought-iron gates, infrared perimeter sensors, and a rotating detail of men carrying concealed firearms, it felt less like a home and more like a high-end penitentiary. For Jessica Jenkins, moving her duffel bag of thrift store clothes and nursing textbooks into the East Wing's lavish guest suite was a severe culture shock. Her life had become a surreal paradox. By day, under Richard's strict orders, she was escorted in a bulletproof Cadillac Escalade to her pediatric clinicals at Massachusetts General Hospital. By late afternoon, she returned to the compound to work with Lily. Richard was a man of his word. He had quietly paid off her entire student loan balance within 24 hours, a terrifying display of his reach and resources. Yet, the intimidating Mafia boss treated Jessica with a cautious, almost reverent distance. He gave her complete authority over Lily's routine, watching from the periphery with a brooding intensity that made Jessica's skin prickle. The progress with Lily was not linear, but it was miraculous. Jessica didn't push. Instead, she brought the normalcy of the cafe into the sterile mansion. They baked. They made massive, flowery messes in the industrial kitchen, while Dominic, a 6'4" enforcer with a spiderweb tattoo on his neck, awkwardly helped them separate egg yolks. One evening in early December, as the Boston snow piled up against the French doors of the conservatory, Jessica was helping Lily paint. "Can you pass the blue, Jessica?" Lily asked. Her voice was still quiet, lacking the boisterous energy of a typical 5-year-old, but it was steady. "Here you go, sweetie," Jessica said, sliding the palette over. "What are we painting today?" Lily dipped her brush. The loud car. The one Mummy was in. Jessica's blood ran cold. She froze, her paintbrush hovering in the air. The psychiatrists had explicitly warned against forcing Lily to revisit the Lexington Avenue ambush, but they had also advised not to shut her down if she brought it up naturally. "The car?" Jessica asked, keeping her tone light and conversational. "Yes," Lily said, painting a dark, jagged smear across the paper. Mummy was mad. She was yelling at Uncle Leo on the phone. She said, "I'm going to tell Richard everything you did at the docks." And then the glass broke. Jessica stopped breathing. Uncle Leo. Leo Rossi was Richard's underboss, his oldest childhood friend from the North End, and the man who currently controlled the Castiglione Syndicate's lucrative seaport operations. He was a frequent fixture at the house, always ruffling Lily's hair, always pouring Richard's scotch. Sophia wasn't a random casualty of a rival gang's hit, Jessica realized with a sickening jolt. She was the target, and the call came from inside the house. That night, Jessica couldn't sleep. The mansion was tomb silent. She threw on a thick cardigan over her pajamas and padded down the sweeping mahogany staircase toward the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed the library, a sliver of golden light spilled out into the hallway. She peeked inside. Richard was sitting behind his massive oak desk, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring into the roaring fireplace. He looked exhausted, the heavy burden of his crown pressing down on him. He had his dress shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing a map of scars and faded ink on his forearms. "You're awake," his deep voice rumbled. He hadn't even looked her way. His situational awareness was terrifying. "I couldn't sleep." Jessica stepped into the room. "The snow." Richard gestured to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit, Jessica." She did, pulling her cardigan tight. The physical proximity to him always made her hyper-aware. There was a dangerous, undeniable gravity to Richard Castiglione. He wasn't just a boss. He was fiercely protective, ruthlessly intelligent, and when he looked at her, Jessica felt completely exposed. "She laughed today," Richard said softly, turning his dark eyes toward her. "When Dominic dropped the flower, I was in the hallway. I heard her laugh." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything, Richard," Jessica said, using his first name for the first time. The intimacy of the dark room demanded it. "She's a wonderful little girl. She just needed someone to stop treating her like she was broken." Richard's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The air between them thickened, crackling with an unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. It was entirely inappropriate. He was her employer, a grieving widower, and a dangerous criminal. She was a broke nursing student, but the raw, magnetic pull was undeniable. "You don't belong in this world, Jessica," he murmured, his voice rough. "You're too good, too clean. But heaven help me, I am terrified of the day you decide to leave us." Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to lean into him, to smooth the worry lines from his forehead, but the memory of Lily's painting flashed in her mind like a warning siren. "Richard," Jessica started, her voice trembling slightly. "There's something you need to know. About the day Sophia died. Lily talked about it today." Richard's posture changed instantly. The vulnerable father vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the Boston underworld. His eyes went flat and cold. "What did she say?" "She said Sophia was on the phone right before the shooting started. She was arguing." She said she was going to tell you what he was doing at the docks. Jessica swallowed hard. Richard. She was yelling at Leo. The silence that followed Jessica's revelation was heavier than the snow burying the estate outside. Richard didn't yell. He didn't throw his glass. He simply stood up, his face a terrifying, expressionless mask of absolute violence. The betrayal of a brother ran deeper than any rival gang's bullet. "Go upstairs, Jessica," Richard said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Lock the door to your suite. Do not come out until I or Silas come for you." "Richard, what are you going to do?" "I am going to clean my house," he replied softly. But Leo Rossi hadn't survived 20 years in the Mafia by being oblivious. He had eyes inside the compound. A guard loyal to Leo had noted the sudden, frantic, late-night activity. Richard dispatching his most loyal men to secure the perimeter, the armory being opened. Leo knew his time was up. He also knew his only bargaining chip was the little girl who could identify his motive. Before Jessica even reached the top of the stairs, the tranquility of the Brookline estate was shattered. It started with a concussive blast that blew the reinforced front doors off their hinges, sending a shockwave of heat and splintered oak through the grand foyer. Alarms blared, a piercing, deafening wail. Jessica screamed, thrown against the banister. Gunfire erupted, the sharp staccato crack of automatic weapons echoing off the marble floors. "Jessica, get to Lily!" Richard roared over the chaos, drawing a heavy Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster as he vaulted over the desk, laying down suppressive fire toward the breached entrance to cover her retreat. Jessica scrambled up the stairs on her hands and knees, adrenaline flooding her system. She burst into Lily's room. The little girl was sitting up in bed, her hands clamped over her ears, her eyes wide with the same terror that had stolen her voice 2 years ago. "Lily, come here," Jessica commanded, stripping away her panic and replacing it with the clinical, focused calm of an emergency room nurse. She scooped the child up. "We're going to play a hiding game. Right now." She carried Lily into the adjoining master bathroom, dragging a heavy linen cabinet in front of the reinforced mahogany door. She pulled Lily into the sunken marble bathtub, pulling thick towels over them, shielding the child's body with her own. "Jessica." The loud noises came back, Lily sobbed, burying her face in Jessica's chest. "I know, baby, I know. But your daddy is here. He's going to stop them," Jessica whispered fiercely, praying it was true. Downstairs, the mansion had become a war zone. Leo Rossi had sent a hit squad, desperate, heavily armed men. But they were fighting Richard Castiglione in his own home. Richard moved with lethal, terrifying precision. Every shadow in the mansion belonged to him. Silas and Dominic flanked him, turning the grand hallways into a fatal choke point for the intruders. But Leo was desperate. He slipped through the servants' staircase, bypassing the main firefight. Jessica heard the heavy, purposeful footsteps in the bedroom. Then, the sound of the door handle rattling. "Open the door, Jessica." Leo's muffled, heavily accented voice came through the wood. "I just need the kid. Give me the kid, and you walk away. You're just a nurse. This ain't your fight." Jessica held her breath, her hand clamped gently over Lily's mouth. She scanned the bathroom for a weapon. Nothing but expensive heavy glass lotion bottles. She grabbed the heaviest one, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. "I know you're in there," Leo shouted. The wood began to splinter as he kicked the heavy door. It was reinforced, but the hinges were giving way under the brute force. With a final, sickening crack, the door busted open, shoving the linen cabinet aside. Leo stepped into the bathroom, his gun raised, his face twisted in a desperate sneer. Before he could level the weapon at the bathtub, a shadow filled the doorway behind him. Richard didn't say a word. He didn't offer a dramatic monologue. He lunged, driving a combat knife deep into the space beneath Leo's collarbone, incapacitating his gun arm instantly. Leo screamed, dropping the weapon. Richard spun him around, slamming the traitor against the marble wall with bone-crushing force. "You killed my wife," Richard snarled, his voice a demonic rasp, "and you tried to touch my daughter." Jessica covered Lily's eyes, burying the child's face into her sweater as Richard finished what Leo had started 2 years prior. It was brutal, efficient, and horrifying. When the heavy thud of a body hit the floor, the bathroom fell dead silent, save for Richard's ragged breathing. Jessica looked up. Richard stood over the body of his former best friend, his white dress shirt soaked in blood, both Leo's and his own. A dark crimson stain was spreading rapidly across Richard's left side. He looked at Jessica, his eyes wild, before his knees buckled and he collapsed onto the tiles. "Richard!" Jessica shoved the towels off, lifting Lily out of the tub. "Lily, go to the corner. Turn around and cover your eyes. Do not look." Jessica fell to her knees beside the Mafia boss. Her nursing instincts took over completely. She ripped his shirt open, exposing a clean bullet through and through on his left flank. He was losing blood fast, slipping into shock. "Silas!" Jessica screamed at the top of her lungs. "Dominic, medical kit, now!" Richard grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite the blood loss. Is she? "We're fine. We're perfectly fine," Jessica said, her voice shaking as she pressed a thick towel hard against his wound, using her entire body weight to apply pressure. "Stay with me, Richard. Do not close your eyes." He looked up at her, a bloody, exhausted smile touching the corners of his mouth. "You're ruining your sweater, Jessica." "Shut up and let me save your life," she snapped, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. Silas burst into the room with the trauma kit. Over the next hour, the sprawling estate transformed from a battleground into a makeshift trauma ward. Jessica worked tirelessly, packing the wound, administering IV fluids from the estate's emergency stockpile, and stabilizing the man who had turned her world upside down. When the sun finally rose over Boston, painting the snow-covered grounds in brilliant gold, the sirens of paid-off private ambulances and discreet cleanup crews filled the driveway. The threat of the Rossi faction was dismantled in a single, bloody night. 3 weeks later, the mansion was quiet again, but the oppressive, heavy silence was gone. Richard sat in the conservatory, a cane resting against his leg as he healed. He was watching through the glass doors. Outside in the snow, Jessica and Lily were building a lopsided snowman. Lily was laughing, a loud, brilliant, unrestrained sound that echoed across the grounds. Jessica turned and locked eyes with Richard through the glass. She smiled, brushing snow from her coat, and walked back inside, leaving Lily to decorate the snowman with Silas. She walked over to Richard's armchair. He reached out, his scarred hand wrapping gently around her wrist, pulling her down to sit on the arm of his chair. He didn't look at her like a boss anymore. He looked at her like a man who had finally found the piece of his soul he thought died on Lexington Avenue. "You're supposed to be resting," Jessica scolded softly, though she didn't pull her hand away. "I've rested enough," Richard murmured, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her knuckles. "I have a family to look after." He looked up at her, the ruthless boss replaced entirely by a man hopelessly, dangerously in love. And as Jessica leaned down to meet his lips, she knew she had traded her quiet, predictable life for one of beautiful, chaotic devotion. The Boston underworld still whispered Richard Castiglione's name with terror, but the suffocating shadows in his Brookline mansion had permanently vanished. Jessica traded her cafe apron for a permanent place at the head of his table, a flawless diamond catching the light on her finger. Lily's laughter now echoed through the halls relentlessly. Out of a cold, lopsided chocolate heart, a broken family had forged an unbreakable, bulletproof love.